If you want to support the show, you can go to mwpnews.com/support, where you can pick up my latest book, Succession Planning, and all my other books that have previously been released on Kindle for only $2.99 each. Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to the Backlog Files. I am Adam. On this, a Tuesday evening, we're going to talk today about the Pokemon Presents presentation. Briefly, we're not going to go too deep on it, because I feel like the presentation had a lot more subtext than it did text. I think very much, the fact that this presentation didn't bring us anything groundbreaking besides the one new game announcement is kind of telling. I think Pokemon has been kind of embattled since, let's say, 2020. Because I think 2020, end of 2020, when we got the DLC for Sword and Shield. Since then, they've had Legends, which was buggy at launch, but I think the most interesting of the games they've released since then. There was, Legends Arceus. Now we can't just say Legends anymore. There was, what was the next one? There was, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl was first. Before that, that game was not well received. I didn't see what the big deal was about it that being that bad. I liked the chibi thing, and I liked it kind of playing with the old games. But it is what it is. It maybe not for full retail price, but that is what it is. And then there is also, Scarlet and Violet, and Scarlet and Violet had a lot of issues. Scarlet and Violet was kind of, what was the word I'm looking for here? Not broken. It's a broken game. And it would have been my game of the year if they had delivered on what the game could have been. So the issue that I have now is when I look at this presentation, what they could have done to make it feel better for not just me, but anyone out there who kind of looked at this and was like, how do we deal with, they're obviously stretched too thin here. And I think that, number one, the fact that we're not getting a game this year at all is telling, because they could have had the team that worked on Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl work on Black and White remakes, Black and White 3, whatever you want to call it. That team could have done that. And that could have been interesting. But they didn't. That team is not working on Black and White remakes. And I think that that's telling. I think that that's them saying, we are afraid, we saw people didn't like that. Let's not do it again. Even though it sold, we saw people didn't like it. It was not well received. And we don't want to keep that section of the fan base, we don't want to get too pissed off. And I think that was what that happened. And then the same thing with Scarlet and Violet, and then the DLC for Scarlet and Violet, where it's like, yeah, it didn't look great. It didn't run great. And the second DLC pack is just not good. The Indigo Disc is just, I'm playing through it and I'm like, this should have just been the end of the game. What the hell? This is not good. At a full, almost half the retail price. So the issue that I had, seeing this should have been we hear you if you're going to go this route. Because that's kind of what this is at the end of the day. The fact that we're getting another Legends game where it is this thing where it's this giant, all one environment, one giant city. It's set in the future. It's Lumio City from Kalos, sprawling. It's a cyberpunk kind of look. All of these things, excuse me, all of these things sound really cool. And then to say, look, we're not releasing it this year. We're releasing it in 2025. That's big. That's them saying we're going to give this time to cook. We're going to give this time to make sure that it's properly baked all the way through before we release it. And I think that that's a big deal for them. My only thing is, I would have liked something on the Switch this year, in the waning days of the Switch from the Pokemon Company. Or not the Pokemon Company specifically, any company related. Give me Ranger. Give me a remake of Explorers of Sky or Explorers of Time and Darkness. Give me a remake of Coliseum or XD. Like, there are so many great franchises. Give me a new pinball game. Hell, put the fucking old games on the virtual console. That's the thing that baffles me the most about this. We are at the end of the Switch's life cycle, and presumably, when the Switch 2 comes out next year, which is the new rumor, it's going to carry over all your Switch Online stuff. So I don't think we're going to have this waiting period for the Switch Online library to sit here and grow. Why would you, unless they're planning, like, the big thing to get people on board with the Switch 2 is going to be a major Pokemon push? I don't know what you're doing. Like, in this case, I don't know why we're sitting here and we're like, well, winner red, blue, yellow, gold, silver, crystal, ruby, sapphire, emerald, and fire red and leaf green. When are these games coming to virtual console? I don't know. Like, why are we sitting here questioning this? Like, I, I sit here I'm like, what are you doing this year? Do all I have for this year from this franchise is Pokemon Sleep, Pokemon Go, Pokemon Cafe Remix, Pokemon Unite, Pokemon Masters EX. Is that all we have for this year? If that's the case, then that's not a great year for this franchise. I mean, next year could be fantastic. And I think there's a chance that we end up with, with these, with a huge Pokemon push on the Switch too. I think there's a very real chance that, based on when Legends came out the first time, and I think there's a possibility that we say, they say coming 2025. I don't think they're advertising this as coming 2025 it's coming November 2025. I don't think that's the case. I think it's coming 2025, and this is a launch title for the Switch 2 in March. That's what I think this is. Like, or within that launch window. Like, I don't think that they're announcing a game now and being like, it's coming November 2025. I think it's coming, early 2025. That is way too far out to announce a late 2025. I think if it comes January or February, and that's the thing too, is that it's like Nintendo has to stop playing coy with the Switch too, because it's creating a lot of confusion in the marketplace about where we are in the Switch's life cycle, and what are we expecting from the Switch 2. Me personally, I think that whatever the next Switch is not going to be an incremental upgrade. I think this is a new console. This is the SNES to the NES, or the Wii to the GameCube. This is the next step forward for Nintendo. It's going to have way better graphics. It's going to have way better capabilities, and it's going to be a stronger console in terms of that, while still being handheld. All of that is great. We need to have an answer from Nintendo, because my question, and also a concrete when. When is this coming out? Because this game's coming in 2025, as is the Switch 2. Is this just a very late Switch title? Because it's advertised as a Switch game. Is it just a very late in the life cycle Switch title, to the point where it's like, well, that doesn't bode well. That doesn't make me optimistic for what this could be. Because if it's just they're dumping it out on Switch, then it's like, well, why weren't they developing this for the Switch too? Is this a bridge title like Breath of the Wild, where it is one edition is on the Switch, one edition is on the Switch too? If that's the case, I'm a little more optimistic, because then Nintendo is putting this in a position where it is, this is a game that we're so confident in that we're going to have it be one of our marquee titles in that launch window. Or is this one of those things where it's like, it's actually on the Switch too, they're just advertising it as the Switch? Because if you told me that the Pokemon Company, like, the reason why Scarlet and Violet was so lackluster was because they'd been putting all their effort into this, like, they used, like, I could see, there's a real scenario, and forgive me for this, but Scarlet and Violet feels like such a step back from Sword and Shield, that I think there's a solid scenario in which the Pokemon Company has been working on this game for so long that, just so that way they had something coming out and keeping the franchise going, because the franchise is so multifaceted, between the trading card game, between the anime, between all that stuff, that they need to keep mainline games coming. That Scarlet and Violet were the B project that they threw out just to get that done and be like, look, we made an open world Pokemon game. There's a reason why that game feels so much less polished than Legends Arceus, and I think that's a very real scenario where it's like they got a Switch 2 dev kit. They were working on this for the Switch 2, and they've been working on this as a launch title. I think that's a very real possibility. I don't know anything for certain, but I would not be shocked if that was where this whole situation was. Or equally, I also think it's possible that it's just like, fuck it, we're gonna dump it out in the waning days of the Switch and call it a day. The only thing that holds me back from thinking that's the definitive thing is the fact that I think if they were going to do that, they would not announce it this far out. And giving it that, like, they're not putting it in, like, and that's the thing too, if they're putting it in November and they're launching it as a Switch exclusive title, that makes no sense too. November 2025, because at that point, presumably we'll have the Switch 2 for about 6 months. Over 6 months, probably like 8 months. If it's coming out in March, we'll have it for about 8 months. So at that point, why are you putting out more software for the Switch? And if you're Nintendo and you're partnering with the Pokemon Company as closely as you are, and you're partnering with Game Freak as closely as you are, why are you allowing that? Like, I think that the Switch is just the Switch branding, and I think this is a confirmation that the Switch branding is going to stick around for a while. Whether it be Switch 2, whether it be Super Switch, whether it be whatever they want to call this thing, the branding of the Nintendo Switch is not going anywhere. I think is what we got the big confirmation of today. We got confirmation that the Pokemon Company has heard what people have complained about regarding Scarlet and Violet. We heard what people were complaining about regarding the last two remakes, and that's where we are right now. I would have liked to have seen something else, but maybe it's the like. And as for the Virtual Console, I think they're holding back the stuff because of the launch of Switch 2. Because there's no reason why at this point you wouldn't. Even if it was, you can't transfer it out into home, which I think is possibly a leading issue as to why the Pokemon Company has not put these games on Switch Online. I think it's a very real and very serious issue if it is the case. But at the same time, if it's just like, look, you want to play these games, you can. You just can't transfer Pokemon out. I feel like people would be like, all right, fine. Like, at the same time, it's like, if it's just playing an emulated version of the game on Switch Online, I feel like people would be okay with that. Even if you can't transfer Pokemon out. I feel like people would be okay with that. And if you did that for the first three generations and you just had them on there, that's a huge thing to be like, look at all the stuff you're getting. But I think if you launch the Switch 2 with a exclusive library of online games for the Game Boy Advance, for the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy base, and included in that is like, oh, and by the way, exclusive to the Switch 2, you can play for free, included in your subscription, all of the first three generations of the Pokemon games online. I feel like that's a system seller. But we'll see. We'll wrap up there for today. This week we're also talking about the history of Dune in video games. Well, specifically the history of Dune in the 4X / grand strategy genre. I went and played a round of Dune Spice Wars, and we're going to talk about that. And that we'll be doing that on Friday. And then we'll be talking about next week Pokemon Crystal will be our next game in our series. Um, but we'll see. We will see how any of this turns out. I mean, it's very likely that I'm wrong. Let's be completely honest, because I don't have the best track record. But we'll see. Until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.